It's a pretty dramatic image, isn't it? Imagine a young man, barely out of his teens, caught behind enemy lines. He's dressed in plain clothes, maybe with a secret message tucked away somewhere. His heart beats fast. He knows the stakes are high. If he's caught, it's not just imprisonment. It's a rope. It's a firing squad. And then this young man, against all odds, survives this brush with death only to later become the President of the United States. It sounds like something from a movie, a thrilling backstory for a national leader. And the question is, did this almost happen to William McKinley? Was a future American president during the bloody years of the Civil War nearly executed as a spy? People ask this kind of thing, you know? They dig into history looking for those hidden dramatic moments. We often want our heroes to have these intense secret struggles. It makes their later achievements feel even more profound. But here's the plain truth about William McKinley and any notion of him being a spy in the Civil War, or of him being nearly executed for it. It just didn't happen. There's no historical record, no credible evidence, no whisper in the archives to support such a claim. It's a story that, while exciting, isn't based on facts. William McKinley did serve in the Civil War. He served with distinction, in fact. He enlisted as a private and left the army as a brevet major. His service was open, uniformed, and well documented. He wasn't a shadowy figure slipping through enemy lines in disguise. He was a soldier, a commissary sergeant, and an aide de camp, serving right out in the open on battlefields and in camps. His job was to fight, to supply, and to help command, not to gather intelligence in secret. So, where does a question like this even come from? Sometimes these kinds of rumors just appear. They might come from a misunderstanding or a conflation of different stories, or maybe even from a political smear aimed at a public figure. People love a good secret history, but when you look at the actual records, the letters, the official reports, the memoirs of those who served with him, there's just nothing. No mention of capture, no court-martial for espionage, no dramatic escape from the gallows. But McKinley's story is interesting enough on its own without needing to invent such a dramatic twist. He joined the Union Army very early in the war, just like a lot of young men his age. He wasn't pushed or pulled into it. He believed in the cause. He was from Ohio, a state that was very much on the Union side. He enlisted in the summer of 1861, just a few months after the war started. He was 18 years old. He wasn't some hardened operative. He was a teenager who wanted to do his part. The unit he joined was the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. It was a good regiment, full of earnest men, and it would see a lot of action. And another future president, Rutherford B. was one of its commanders. So McKinley's connection to the presidency goes back even further than his own time in the White House. He served directly under Hayes for much of the war, a detail that's quite important when we think about his character and his path. This idea of him being a spy, it really just doesn't fit with anything we know about his time in uniform. And it certainly doesn't fit with how spying actually worked during the Civil War, or how military careers typically unfolded. But we'll get into all of that. For now, just remember the thrilling tale of McKinley the spy, narrowly escaping execution, is just that at a tale, not history. William McKinley's actual Civil War story is, in its own way, quite compelling even without the spy drama. It's a story of a young man starting at the absolute bottom of the military hierarchy and working his way up through diligence, bravery, and a real knack for leadership. He didn't start as some privileged officer. He started as a private, just like countless other American men. When he enlisted in June 1861, he joined Company E of the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. This regiment was part of the Union forces operating in West Virginia, a crucial border state and a place where the loyalties were very divided. It was rough country, lots of mountains and valleys, and the fighting there was often a brutal series of skirmishes and smaller engagements rather than the massive set-piece battles seen elsewhere. So McKinley quickly showed he was more than just another recruit. He wasn't just good at following orders, he was good at understanding what needed to be done and how to do it efficiently. This was especially true when it came to logistics, something that might not sound glamorous, but was absolutely vital for any army. Your armies, after all, march on their stomachs. Within a few months, in April 1862, he was promoted to commissary sergeant. This meant he was responsible for getting food and supplies to the troops. It sounds like a behind-the-lines job, and it often was, but it was also incredibly important and required real courage. Supply lines were constantly attacked, roads were bad, weather was worse, and enemy raiders were always a threat. Keeping thousands of soldiers fed and equipped was a massive undertaking, and it taught McKinley a lot about organization and managing resources under pressure. His bravery wasn't limited to logistics, though. One of the most famous stories from his Civil War service happened during the Battle of Antietam in September 1862. This was the bloodiest single day in American history. The fighting was horrific, intense, and relentless. The 23rd Ohio was heavily engaged. At one point, the men were exhausted and hungry under constant fire. McKinley, as the commissary sergeant, saw their plight. Instead of staying in a safer area, he personally drove a wagon load of hot coffee and rations right up to the front lines amidst the intense fighting. He made sure the men got their food. This was not a small thing. It was an act of incredible courage and initiative. His commanding officer, Rutherford B. Hayes, saw this. Hayes, who would later become president himself, was deeply impressed. He recommended McKinley for a promotion, and shortly after Antietam, McKinley was commissioned as a second lieutenant. This was a huge jump, from an enlisted man to an officer, and it shows the trust and respect he had already earned. From then on, McKinley continued to rise. He was promoted to first lieutenant in February 1863, and then to captain in July 1864. He served for much of this time as an aide-de-camp on the staff of General Hayes. An aide-de-camp is essentially a personal assistant and staff officer to a high-ranking commander. This was a demanding job. It meant carrying messages across dangerous battlefields, helping to coordinate troop movements, writing reports, and being constantly at the side of his general, often in the thick of the fighting. He saw action in many other significant battles beyond Antietam. He was at South Mountain, where the 23rd Ohio also played a critical role. Later in the war, during the crucial Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, he was with Hayes during battles like Opequon, also known as 3rd Winchester and Cedar Creek. These were hard-fought engagements, decisive in driving Confederate forces out of the valley. At Cedar Creek, the Union Army was nearly routed in a surprise attack, but managed to turn the tide. McKinley was right there, assisting Hayes as they tried to rally the troops. His service record clearly paints a picture of a dedicated, competent, and brave officer. He was a trusted staff member, not a secret agent. He wore his uniform proudly, fought openly, and rose through the ranks because of his demonstrated abilities on the conventional battlefield and in the vital realm of logistics. By the end of the war, he had earned a brevet promotion to Major for gallantry in action, a well-deserved honor for his 4 years of continuous service. This official record leaves absolutely no room for him to have been a spy. His path was straightforward, even if it was challenging and dangerous. Now, let's talk about what spying actually looked like during the Civil War, and why the idea of a uniformed officer like William McKinley being a spy simply doesn't fit the historical reality. When we think of spies, our minds often go to cloaked figures and elaborate disguises, maybe even some super modern gadgets. But the Civil War era was a bit different. Espionage was much more rudimentary, but no less dangerous. The people who generally acted as spies were rarely uniformed officers from their own army. Think about it. If you're a high-ranking officer, like a captain or a major, especially one serving on a general staff, you're known. Your face is recognizable, your uniform identifies you instantly. You're a valuable asset in your current role. To send someone like that behind enemy lines as a spy would be incredibly reckless and inefficient. It would be an almost guaranteed way to get them caught and probably executed without much intelligence gained. Instead, Civil War spies were often civilians. They might be men or women who lived near the front lines and had contacts on both sides. They could blend in. They might be farmers, shopkeepers, or even socialites who use their connections to gather information. Think of figures like Bell Boyd, a famous Confederate spy, or Alan Pinkerton, who ran a Union intelligence service. These were not uniformed military officers. Belle Boyd was a civilian woman who used her charm and social position to gather intelligence. Pinkerton's operatives were detectives, not army officers. Sometimes, soldiers were sent out as scouts or on reconnaissance missions. This is a key distinction. A scout or a reconnaissance party would typically be in uniform or at least have some identifying military gear. Their job was to observe enemy positions, troop movements, and report back. They might operate close to enemy lines, but generally not deep behind them, and they weren't trying to pass themselves off as civilians or members of the other side. This was a legitimate military function, and officers certainly took part in it. But it's very different from being a spy who operates secretly, out of uniform, gathering intelligence that way. The risks for actual spies were immense. If you were caught operating behind enemy lines out of uniform, trying to gather intelligence, you were considered a spy under the laws of war, and the penalty was almost always death. There wasn't a lot of leniency. It was a harsh reality, but it was understood by everyone involved. So, if McKinley had been caught as a spy, there's very little chance he would have survived, let alone simply been imprisoned and released. A future president would not have been allowed to escape such a fate without massive historical documentation of the event. Most intelligence during the Civil War was gathered through more conventional, if still dangerous, means. Cavalry probes would scout ahead. Deserters from the enemy ranks were often interrogated for information. Captured documents provided valuable clues. Signal Corps units used flags and heliographs to transmit messages, and sometimes to intercept enemy communications. Officers like McKinley were involved in the process of acting on intelligence, or helping to gather it through legitimate military channels like talking to scouts or reviewing reports. But that's a far cry from being a spy himself. McKinley's roles, first as a commissary sergeant and then as an aide de camp, were highly visible and functional within the military structure. A commissary sergeant's job requires being known to the troops to distribute supplies. An aide-de-camp is constantly at the side of a general, often riding with him, carrying his dispatches and representing him. These are not roles that lend themselves to secret, clandestine operations. It would be impossible to effectively perform those duties while also trying to secretly infiltrate enemy lines as an undercover agent. The very nature of his assigned responsibilities makes the spy claim impossible. So, when you consider the actual practices of espionage during the Civil War, the typical profiles of spies, and the severe consequences of being caught, the idea of William McKinley, a rising uniformed officer on a general's staff, being a spy, or nearly executed as one, falls apart completely. It simply doesn't align with the historical context of wartime intelligence operations. Okay, so if William McKinley definitely wasn't a spy and wasn't nearly executed, why would such a question even come up? Where do these kinds of rumors, even if they're not widely spread, originate? It's an interesting aspect of how history gets remembered and sometimes misremembered. One possible reason is the general human fascination with hidden stories and secret histories, especially when it comes to famous people. We like to think that our leaders have these dramatic, untold chapters in their pasts. It makes them seem more complex, more heroic, or even more cunning. The idea that a future president had such a close call with death in such a cloak and dagger way is inherently appealing. It adds a layer of excitement that might not be present in the straightforward, though still honorable account of his service. Another source for such questions could be confusion with other historical figures or events. The Civil War was a huge, sprawling conflict, and many people had dramatic experiences. There were certainly real spies, and some of them did face execution or came very close to it. It's possible that someone might conflate McKinley's name with another individual's true spy story, or a dramatic incident involving a different officer. Details can get muddled over time, names can be swapped, and before you know it, a rumor starts taking on a life of its own. Political mudslinging is also a common culprit. During McKinley's political career, especially his presidential campaigns, he faced intense opposition. His opponents would have dug up anything they could to discredit him. If there was even the slightest hint, the most remote whisper, of him being involved in something shady or controversial during the war, you can bet his political enemies would have seized on it. The fact that no such accusation, even a false one, seems to have gained traction during his lifetime or political campaigns suggests there was absolutely no basis for it. His war record was always presented as a point of pride, something solid and honorable. Then there's the nature of war itself. It's chaotic, confusing, and full of strange occurrences. Soldiers often found themselves in unexpected situations, sometimes behind enemy lines, sometimes isolated. It's conceivable that McKinley, like many officers, might have been on a reconnaissance mission that took him close to, or briefly within enemy territory. But again, that's not being a spy, and it's certainly not being caught and nearly executed as one. These are routine military actions, albeit dangerous ones, but the human mind, looking back, might interpret a dangerous scouting mission as something more dramatic, something clandestine. The allure of the what-if scenario plays a role too. What if he had been a spy? What if he had been caught? It allows us to imagine an alternate history, a world where the future of the presidency might have been very different. These thought experiments are fun, but they aren't history. History is what actually happened. The difficulty in disproving a negative is another factor. It's hard to prove something didn't happen, especially when a rumor gains a foothold. You can present all the evidence for what did happen, but the absence of evidence for the counterclaim can sometimes be twisted into they're hiding something. But in the case of McKinley, the historical record of his service is so robust, so thoroughly documented by himself, his comrades, and official reports, that there's simply no gap for such a dramatic, unrecorded event to have occurred. So, while the idea of McKinley the Spy is certainly exciting, it's best understood as a product of our natural tendency to seek drama in history, or perhaps a misunderstanding of the true nature of Civil War espionage. It's not a secret chapter waiting to be uncovered. It's just not there. Ultimately, what matters most is historical accuracy. It's fun to imagine these dramatic alternate histories, these secret lives of famous people, but when we're talking about actual history, it's really important to stick to the facts. And the facts about William McKinley's Civil War service tell a consistent, clear story that doesn't involve espionage or near execution. His actual wartime experience was incredibly significant, not just for him personally, but for his later political career and for understanding the kind of leader he became. He joined the army as a teenager, a private, and endured the incredibly harsh conditions of Civil War soldiering. He saw combat, he faced danger, and he witnessed the brutality of war firsthand. This was not a theoretical experience for him, it was real, gritty, and formative. His rise from private to major was based on merit. He wasn't appointed to a high rank because of family connections or political influence. He earned his promotions through hard work, a keen eye for logistics, and undeniable bravery under fire. That story of a young man working his way up through dedication and courage is a classic American narrative. It shows character, resilience, and a capacity for leadership that would serve him well later in life. The incident at Antietam, bringing hot food and coffee to his exhausted comrades under intense enemy fire, is a powerful testament to his character. It shows his care for the men, his initiative, and his willingness to put himself in harm's way for the welfare of others. This kind of story, backed by multiple accounts and leading to a well-deserved promotion, is far more revealing about the man he was than any invented spy tale could be. It demonstrates a practical, empathetic, and brave leader. Serving on Rutherford B. Hayes' staff also exposed him to high-level military strategy and administration. He learned how generals thought, how armies were managed, and how decisions were made under pressure. This experience gave him an invaluable education in leadership, organization, and the complexities of national affairs. It's hard to imagine a better training ground for a future president, frankly. His Civil War service undoubtedly shaped his political outlook. He would have emerged from the war with a profound understanding of national unity, the sacrifices made to preserve it, and the deep divisions that needed to be healed. These experiences would inform his policies as a congressman, governor, and ultimately as president, particularly his efforts to foster reconciliation and promote economic stability. So, when we look at the question of whether William McKinley was nearly executed as a spy, the answer is a firm no. And it's not a disappointing answer. It's actually a more accurate and meaningful one. His real story is one of honorable service, of rising through the ranks by his own merits, and of gaining invaluable experience that prepared him for the highest office in the land. There's no need to invent a dramatic secret past for him. The true story of Major McKinley the soldier is impressive enough all on its own. It's a reminder that sometimes the unvarnished truth is more compelling than any fiction.